Good afternoon. This is Matthew Tilley, the pastor of North Beaver Baptist Church in West Jefferson, North Carolina. And I wasn't able to do a live stream of our service this morning. We didn't have power at our at our building, and but we did have a nice group of folks who showed up, and we prayed together. We spent some time together. But because I wasn't able to share anything from that service on here with our normal live stream audience, I wanted to go ahead and come on and give you just a brief devotional from the same passage that we looked at this morning, which was in Isaiah chapter 41. And I'll be looking at that in just a moment. Before I begin, though, I do want to make an appeal to anyone who's watching, particularly if you're in and around our area and our community. If you have any needs whatsoever that we can try to help you with, I am connected into some of the agencies and some of the resources that are available throughout the county. I'm working to get better connections and making sure that I can direct people to the right places. But if you don't have access to the help you need, if you need anything, particularly the necessities of life, things like water and food and things like that, please reach out. I will make a point to drop in my comments both on Facebook and on YouTube a way to reach out to me. But you can certainly contact through any of these social media channels. If you're watching this, you're certainly welcome to respond. And I will do the best I can to respond to you and connect you to those resources. So I do know there are a lot of agencies, a lot of groups who are doing a lot of work, a lot of good work. And I want to make sure if you have need of those services and don't know how to get them, you have a way into those. So please let us know, and we want to serve you as best as we can. In the meantime, if there are spiritual needs, emotional needs, anything like that, we could just pray with you, try to be a listening ear for you. You should feel free to reach out as well for those needs as well. That's something I think that the church ought to be prepared to help with, and we are ready to help you with that. So please reach out if we can. So today, I just want to give you this thought that was shared in our service this morning. It was in the dark. We had prayed together over a lot of different things in our community. We were praying for the first responders. We were praying for those who are hurting. We were praying for those like David Blackburn in our community, with the head of our Ashe Baptist Association, who is he's sort of a hub around with a lot of different community groups that are working. We prayed for him. There's a lot of different ones we prayed for this morning. And as a result of, after we prayed for those, went in and shared this thought out of Isaiah chapter 41. I want to just read the passage to you. I think if you hear nothing else I say, if you'll just hear what God has to say, I think it will be a help to you. So I'd like to read that to you. It's in Isaiah 41. I'm just going to read verses 10 through 14. And in this passage, there's a phrase, fear thou not, or fear not. So the variations of it, but it's fear thou not or fear not. Don't be afraid, in so many words. It's repeated 3 times. I want you to listen to how God uses this phrase. It actually starts out this little section with it. It says, fear thou not, for I am with thee. And this is God speaking. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. Behold, all they that are incensed against thee shall be ashamed and confounded. They shall be as nothing, and they that strive with thee shall perish. Thou shalt seek them and shalt not find them, even them that contended with thee. They that war against thee shall be as nothing, and as a thing of naught. For I, the Lord thy God, will hold thy right hand, saying unto thee, fear not, I will help thee. Fear not, thou worm Jacob, and ye men of Israel, I will help thee, saith the Lord, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. That passage means a lot to me over the years. I remember back through the pandemic is one where I really honed in on this section of Isaiah and really got a hold of these verses, and it helped me a lot. There was a particular moment that this idea of God holding my right hand that kind of sealed it down for me. I remember a few years ago, we were living in Durham at the time, Durham, North Carolina. And we were crossing over a small street. It's a little section of 9th Street of Durham, if anybody knows that area. It was a little section there. It's mostly pedestrian. There are a few cars that go through there. It's not an overly trafficked area, but still an area where you want to be careful as you're crossing the street, just like most places. And I say that because I was with my son, who now is, he's a big old boy. He's bigger than I am, but at that time he was a much smaller young man, and he was with me, and we were crossing the street going, I think it was from like a copy place over to a place to get some chicken, a Peruvian chicken joint that I really liked. And of course, Jude being a little boy like he was, he just wants to dash across there. And I remember at that moment, this instinct I had, which was to grab his hand. I reached down and grabbed his hand. I did that because I'm his dad, I'm his father. I'm the bigger one. I'm the stronger one. I'm the trustworthy one. His mom would be mad at me if I didn't protect him. And I'm supposed to do. That's what dads do. Also, I care for him. He's my son. I love him. I want him to be safe. I want him to be healthy. I don't want him to be hurt. And I do love him. I really do. I love him a lot. And it would absolutely devastate me if anything happened to him, even if that wasn't it wasn't a very dangerous road, but even if he had come across there and that car would have just bumped him a little bit, it would have really upset me. So I told him, "Hey, Jude, don't run away. Don't run off. You come back here. Let me hold your hand." I reached down and grabbed his hand. And I believe all the emotion and the power that's wrapped up in that small gesture, of just reaching down your hand and grabbing a young child's hand as you're trying to navigate across the street or go through a busy crowd, and you've been in those situations with a son or a grandchild or somebody, or a son or daughter or a grandchild or something like that. I think all that emotion that's communicated in that simple act is what God is saying to the nation of Israel in this passage in Isaiah chapter 41. Up to this point, God has really shared a lot of judgment through the prophet Isaiah. He has told Israel, "Listen, you're in trouble." But starting about chapter 40, just right before this, he starts to speak peace and comfort. In fact, he even says in chapter 40, verse 1, "Comfort ye my people." That's how he starts off chapter 40. And the reason that he would say that there's comfort to come, of course, is because of this suffering servant that gets really introduced, and we see a lot about coming up in the coming chapters. But nonetheless, that suffering servant who would secure justice and acceptance and restoration, victory. But in this moment in chapter 41, before all that happens, again, that's really the source of it. That's really where real comfort is found, where real hope is found. But before all that, he says, as I've just read to you, don't be afraid. Don't fear. Fear thou not. Don't be afraid. And he says it three times in this little short span of a few verses. And I think this is important for us right now because some of you, and myself included, I don't want to just make it all about y'all. I'm here with you. We're worried about how things are going to turn out. How long is it going to take? How are we going to move forward? What is the best way? And some of you are in some pretty bad circumstances and you don't know exactly how you're going to figure out the next steps that are ahead. But as there's an old song that goes, "There's many things about tomorrow that I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow and I know who holds my hand." You may know that song. I won't upset your ears by singing it because of my singing voice is not what anyone wants to hear. But there's a lot of reasons to have fear in this world, and in our area right now, we have lots of reasons to be concerned. But we have God's word on the fact that we don't have to be afraid. First of all, he says we don't have to be afraid, as he says in verse 10, "For I am thy God," because he is the God that we are trusting. Now, who is the God? Now, again, we talk about gods and in a Christian sense, a Christian setting, in this sense of religion that we tend to be familiar with. At least I'm familiar with, and a lot of you that are listening to me are familiar with. We sort of assume who God is. He's the one true God. We know that, but we don't really think about it in terms of who exactly is He. Well, in this text, and you'll see it throughout these verses that I've read, but if you go back to verse 4, just for context, you'll see he defines himself, he describes himself, and he says, this is who's talking. He says that I, the Lord, the first and the last, I am, and with the last, I am he. He's saying that he is the one who started this thing, and he's the one that ends this thing. And even in his name, in the King James Version, which is what I'm reading, it's Lord. In fact, in verse 4, it's like this. You'll see it again in verse 13, in verse 14, where his name, Lord, Lord. If you look and pay attention, it's actually all capital letters, which is a signal, maybe not a perfect signal, but it's a good signal in the King James Version, at least. And the word underneath that is a very specific name for God. It is his proper name. Just like my name is Matthew and Matthew is a man, my God's name is the name underneath this because my God is a God. So in other words, his name, his proper name is this name. And his name is, we sort of say it in the English way of saying it, is Yahweh. Yahweh. It's actually 4 letters in the Hebrew, but we would pronounce it Yahweh or Jehovah if you want to use that phrasing. Same idea, same word. And it essentially means, first of all, it's his name. His name is Yahweh. His name is Jehovah. He is the self-existing one. There is nobody that he answers to. No one comes before him. He is the uncaused cause. He is the first, as he says there, the first, and he is with the last. He is everything. He is over everything. He's sovereign over it all. And that person, that specific person, is your God. He says, I am thy God in verse 10. And because he is your God, he says in verse 10 that we do not need to be dismayed. He says, fear not, for I'm with thee. I'm thy God. Be not dismayed. And that idea of dismayed is looking around frantically. I'm bad to misplace my keys constantly. I'm constantly misplacing my keys and trying to find them, trying to leave the house and can't do it because I can't find my keys. And when I do that, I get in this frantic, I got to find them, got to find them. I'm looking everywhere. I'm looking at the last place I thought I remember, the last place I normally put them, and all kinds of things. And they end up being in a coat pocket that I forgot I'd worn. You get that frantic feeling, that dismayed that's the idea of dismayed. You're looking every which way to find the right answer. And it may feel like you're making progress, but ultimately it's not helpful. And most of the time, usually it's not very helpful. It just gets you stressed and doesn't really accomplish anything. But God says you don't have to look around in frantic panic. He says, I am with you. I'm right there with you. Because he even says, I will help thee, verse 10, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. He's got all the power that you need. He's got that. This is the God who doesn't need anybody else, who caused everything that we know to exist. And he says, I'm your God. You don't have to worry, look around. Just trust me, I'm your God. And he's going to win no matter what. There's no problem he can't handle. There's no worry that he can't calm. I know we're about to be facing a presidential election, and depending on where your mind is on that, that may be worrisome to you. I just want you to know that whoever the president is, God's in control, and my God is still God. That there's some of you that worry about when is all this mess that we're dealing with the roads and all, and again, that's a very real concern because it literally means that you can't get out of your house for some people. It means you don't have power, so you can't turn the water on, and all sorts of issues that creates. But I want you to know that whenever the power does come on, or no matter how long it is out, that this is the God that we can serve and that is with us and is our God. That when the bad news comes, whatever that bad news is, even when you don't have the answers, this God, he is God. This person, Yahweh, is our God, and he's the one who will and always does win in the end. But not only is he our God, but he is holding our hand. Look at what he says in verse 13. He says there in verse 13 that I, the Lord thy God, again, he reminds you who he is, our God, he is Yahweh, will hold thy right hand, saying, fear not, I will help thee. Now, don't miss the fact that he is this immense, all-powerful God, and he is in control of everything. I genuinely believe, and I would encourage you to believe, that this God that I'm speaking of is literally capable of anything. He can do anything. He has done amazing things. Everything that we know about that is in existence comes at his hand. Yet that same God is, as it's written about in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 23, he is Emmanuel, which is interpreted as God with us. He is this immense, powerful God, but he is close and he is present. The way Peter writes about this in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 17, he says that we can cast our cares on him, on God, the things that burden us, the things that weigh us down. Why? Because he careth for us. That doesn't just mean it does mean he loves us and all that's not, but that's not really the sense there. The sense is that he is actually actively working on our behalf. Now this is the God of the universe, and he is making sure stars are working, the sun rises in the morning and the moon is glowing. He's making sure all of that's working, but he's telling us as well, he is going to hold our hand in this situation, just like a perfect heavenly father would do. He's reaching down to his little child, you and me, and holding our hand. And when he does that, when he grabs that hand, you know what a father does when he's grabbing a little child's hand, assuming he's a loving father. I'm not talking about those mean, mad, bad daddies and all that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about good daddies. When they reach down to hold their son or their grandson's hand, or granddaughter or daughter's hand, they're offering guidance, which way to go. They're saying, listen, come with me this way, son. They're offering protection. I mean, them as by yourself without anybody beside you, all bets are off. No matter, depends on how big you are, I suppose. But they could come after you. But when a good father's got his son or daughter by the hand, nobody's going to bother you. Nobody's going to mess with you. You're protected. But on top of it all, as I tried to tell you in my story when I was telling about holding my son's hand crossing that road, he's loving us. He's watching over us. He's giving us care and protection. Care and protection we may not even realize we need. If you think about that little child, they don't even recognize that the reason mom or dad is holding them back is because there's a car that's zooming back and forth. They may not even recognize it, but that doesn't stop dad from holding the child's hand. And that's what God is offering. He is offering this one who is awe-inspiring in his power, is offering his very close presence with us. And that ought to inspire some confidence for us so that we can just simply trust him and obey him, knowing he is going to give us the tools we need to get through whatever it is that we're about to face. And those may be dark valleys of depression for some people. Those may be a knock on the door that says there's a loved one that's passed away. These may be some of you having to deal with ongoing terminal pain and emotional pain that just won't quit. It may be some uncertainty ahead. I know up here in our neck of the woods, in fact, where I live, we seem like we're constantly in a fog, especially in the fall time. It seems like we're in a fog. And sometimes when you get out on that road and it's so foggy, you can just barely see beyond the end of your car. And maybe that's how your life is. It's just more questions than answer, more confusion than clarity. But in those times, what God has promised is he's going to hold our hand to guide us, to protect us, and to show us his love. This is our God. This is Yahweh, the all-powerful one who lovingly holds your hand. And then lastly, I want to make sure you see this, that he's going to help you. In verse 14, he actually says, "Fear not, thou worm Jacob, and ye men of Israel, I will help thee." Now, it goes on in verses 15 and 16 to describe how he's going to help them. But let me help you understand one thing before we get to that. He calls him a worm. Now, worm Jacob, he's talking about Jacob, which is the children of Israel. And then he says, "you men of Israel." But he references them as a worm. And that's not a mistake. That was actually on purpose. He actually wants to call them a worm, not necessarily as an insult, but to give them a proper perspective. Ultimately, and this may sound bad, but it's true. It's true. Individually, I am, you are, we are all insignificant and powerless. When we are on our own, we are not able to do, some of us are able to do a lot of things and pretty amazing things, but even in spite of that, we are still pretty insignificant. But what God does is he says, I'm going to help you. And when God helps you, and you read those next two verses, 15 and 16, you'll actually see this as it comes to light. But he is saying, listen, I'm going to take those worms that are insignificant and powerless, and I'm going to transform them into mountain movers. He says, I'm going to take those little worms that were probably looked at by so many as victims, as something nothing more than just to run all over and to trounce on. I'm going to turn them into victors. He's going to take those worms that everybody looking at them was going to say, ain't worth anything. And he's going to transform them into something glorious and something amazing. This is what God does. This is what Yahweh does specifically. He helps you. And by helping you, he takes you who may well be powerless. You may be insignificant. It may be that no one is paying any attention. It may be you're not getting the help that you need. But when God helps, and he says he will, he helps in your hopeless situation, he is actually going to do amazing things. And this is what God does throughout the scriptures. Just some of the silly examples that come to my mind, or one of the silly examples rather that comes to my mind, is that donkey that Balaam the prophet was riding on. You may have heard this story from back in Sunday school, but I just need to remind you, there was a donkey, and donkeys, I mean, they're not known to be the smartest of animals, but they just workhorses, right? They just do what they're supposed to do. And sometimes they like to be stubborn and all that. But God took a donkey and put literal words in that donkey's mouth so he could speak to Balaam the prophet who was riding on his back to tell him, hey, listen, man, you need to wake up. God's got a message for you. God can do that. God can take a man like Peter, who, best of my estimation, was probably an illiterate man. But he took him and gave, at least an uneducated man, at least had to give him that, took him and turned him into a man who was able to speak to thousands on Pentecost. He took Paul, who was by all accounts, if he were living today and doing what he did back in the book of Acts before he got converted by Jesus Christ, we would call him a terrorist. But because he met the Lord and God helped him, God turned him into one of these foundational preachers, eloquent men that we look to, that I'm even will read after and preach after for the rest of my ministry on this earth, because of what God has done through the Apostle Paul. And he takes every one of us who were the darkest of sinners, the most stained through and through with sin, and makes us white as snow, makes us clean. God, Yahweh, Jehovah, he is uniquely qualified to help you. There's none of you that are too important to get his help. We all need it. None of us are too much of a loser to get his help. In fact, if you even start to think that way, I want you to know God's ready to help you. He's going to help you when nobody else can or will, and in a way that nobody else can or will. So as I close here, I just want to encourage you, if you feel at all defeated, overwhelmed, or feel like there's no hope, no help, no fix, no answer, no solution, maybe even at that point where you just feel like the fear, just the fear of the unknown may be overwhelming you, I want you to hear Yahweh, your God, speak to you when he says, "Fear thou not, fear not, fear not." He says to you in plain language, don't be afraid. Now, this is not the voice of a man. I know you're hearing it through Matthew Tilley, but it's not the voice of a man. It's not the voice of some mythological being that never existed. No made up stories about him. This is actually the voice of the omnipotent, eternal God who created everything. He is not a self-important dictator, but instead he is the self-existing one, and the one who says, "Hey, I'm your God." That's what he says. That's what he says. And there may be many things about tomorrow that you may not understand, but I can promise you, based on God's word, that we do know who holds tomorrow, and we know who holds our hand. Why don't you come to him? Why don't you cry out to him? Why don't you call on him? He will hold your hand. He will be by your side, and he will lift you up. Now, if you've heard that and that's been any kind of it spoke to you in any kind of a way, if it's helped you at all, or if it's encouraged you at all, or if it's made you have a few more questions, I hope you will reach out. That's what these social media platforms really do well, is it allows us to be connected. So if you'll reach out to me, you can do it in a comment below. You can reach out to me through a private message, however you need to do it. You reach out. I'm going to leave my contact details as well. You reach out if I can be a help to you. But I want you to know that God loves you. He really does. And he's for you. Why don't you call on him and seek his face? He will help you, I promise. There's your thought for Sunday, kind of an unusual Sunday, one that many of you that might normally go to church weren't able to get out today. And I understand that, and I hate that for you. But Lord willing, we'll get get all this behind us, and we'll be able to gather. In fact, we could be any help to you. Maybe you can gather with us at North Beaver Baptist Church in West Jefferson for prayer, for the worship on Sunday. We'd love to